You're listening to the Pithy Chronicle. History with a bite. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. And we bring you history's dirtiest deeds, dripping with sarcasm.
Are you hungry yet?
Okay, Pithy listeners, we are back for round 2 of our Halloween Spooktacular, and we are going to take a look at possibly the first American trial of the century. I mean, colonial, American.
Nah, it still counts.
It counts.
It's epic.
It is absolutely infamous. And if Nancy Grace had been around, she would have been the chief executioner.
Yeah, I can see that for her.
My granny and I watched all of the big trials on TV, and of course we watched some Nancy Grace, and I'll just say this, my granny was not a fan. Oh. And that's where I'll leave that.
Granny had thoughts.
Okay.
And
unlike me, she was very uncensored in her thoughts.
Oh my god, you're the censored one?
I'm the censored one.
That is horrifying.
Before we begin taking our look at the Salem Witch trials, we do need to take note of a few concepts that will influence the rest of the episode. Caroline, you're up.
Okay.
What comes to mind when you think of the Puritans?
Buckles.
Yes.
Shoe buckles.
Big hats.
Big hats.
Black.
But I feel that you mean something more than that, so I'll...
Doilies.
See, that feels frivolous. And I was going to say that the Puritans were anti-frivol. Mm-hmm. They were anti-frill. They were anti-doily. It was all about giving their life to God in a way, and then living a very humble and pure life. So I think of them as being holier than thou, and having no fun, dressed all in black out of modesty. And then I generally put in a Scarlet Letter reference, too. There had to be a few that were like, oh my god, this is the worst lifestyle. And desperately trying to get out.
See that come up. I can't give that away.
Ooh.
But, you're right, not what I'm talking about. What do you know about their actual belief system and the laws and cultures around Puritanism?
Oh. I'm gonna go with Christian.
Accurate.
Anti-fun?
Anti-fun is not really a law or a practice or a belief system.
But I felt they were like all against having any kind of frivolity.
They were more serious, yes.
Serious. And they weren't allowed to do it in England, and they went to America. Colonial
I mean, they kind of really heavily participated in the English Civil War and deposed the king and that sort of thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they were the original colonists.
That's why they had to leave. Not for religious freedom.
They tried to depose the king?
Dude, how do you think Cromwell got in power?
Oh yeah, he was kind of crazy. And very puritanical, I suppose, yeah.
And the Charleses, I mean, they had to go.
They were the frivols.
I mean, they were. And they were in bed with the Catholics. Literally. All of our sources today are linked in the show notes. There is a mind-boggling ton of resources out there. Presbyform was great. Infamous Trials was great. Smithsonian and, of course, Britannica, my favorite, also great.
There you go.
During the early 17th century, Puritans left England due to a combination of wishing to escape religious persecution and to create for themselves a sanctuary where they could prove to the world that their form of religion could work.
The fun-free kind. They
wanted to purify the Church of England of all, and I quote, popish nonsense.
Did they not get the memo? Were they unaware of that whole divorce, beheaded died, divorce, beheaded survived?
After 1, 2, 3, 4-ish generations hoping to move away from the, I'm really still a Catholic, but not really wink wink.
I'm a Catholic in all but the Pope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A little more Protestantism rather than Anglicanism.
Okay.
They wanted to strip bare the iconography and the liturgy to its purest, least frou form.
No fun. I don't know how many times I have to say this.
The Puritans wished to be sure that the same sort of situation where the church was dominated by the government would not occur in their colony, as it had in England. At the same time, they wished to create a, quote, city upon a hill.
City upon a hill.
So that everyone can look to them as the shining example of Christianity, this bastion of hope and utopia, blah, 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 blah.
The ego.
It wasn't ego, Caroline. We're doing it in pursuit of God.
Ego.
Anyway, in making their colony a reality, the Puritans would need to have a working relationship between the church and the state to give liberty to their citizens, but also to ensure discipline and deter depravity.
I hate it when people act depraved.
No, you don't.
No, it's the best.
You just want it to be a safe distance from you.
Yeah, I want to watch it on TikTok. I think that's obvious.
Follow us on TikTok at the Pithy Chroniclers. Here are some of their beliefs.
Go.
They were obsessed with material success. That was not initially something that I thought of.
No, I
Puritan
can see that.
Really wants to be rich.
Because they don't show off their frills in a very outlandish way. If you think about where the American culture started in New England, you can kind of see that old money, understated, but at the same time very obvious. All trying to be very humble, but I'm going to be humble in a very fancy way.
Yes, but also no.
Okay.
Basically, God rewards the just and punished the unjust. So if you had material success, obviously you're doing something right, you're pious, you're one of the elect, you're good with God, and if you are having a hard time in your life, sucks to suck, you're in league with the devil.
So what was their answer to the monarchy having lots of money? How was it that God was giving that institution success?
They must be serving a false god because he's in league with the Pope.
But yet they still have money.
Listen, I'm not saying it's foolproof logic.
I agree. I can't start poking holes in that. I'll move
Yeah,
on.
don't poke holes because I can't justify it. I'm just telling you what they think.
Fair enough.
They did actually drink alcoholic beverages, mostly because of the water supply being but they did actually imbibe in liquors like whiskey and gin.
They needed some sort of a release? Good Lord, these people needed a vice.
They did. But we think of Puritans like absolutely cold turkey, nothing else.
I was really interested in this because you kind of brought this up to me early. And so I looked it up. And it turns out it wasn't really until the 19th century that the idea of abstaining from alcohol is bad, became a part of Christianity. I think it was just so embedded in the culture because you had to kind of be tipsy to not get sick from the water.
Right. You can't serve Jesus if you're dead.
It's harder.
It's definitely more difficult.
Okay.
So, they did not just wear black.
Ooh.
Only the Puritans that we would think about with this high amount of material success could afford the black cloth. So this is how, like you were saying earlier, they would show off their wealth. The wealthier you were, the more highly dyed your clothes were.
All of my early Thanksgiving crafts.
Totally wrong.
Totally wrong.
If you were a field worker, you were in browns, yellows, reds even. Things you could dye with
naturally.
Fruits or leftover vegetables, flowers.
That makes sense.
They did educate both men and women.
Yay.
Now, the women, of course, did not get a full comprehensive education. They were not allowed to go to college or any kind of formal school, but women were the homesteaders taking care of the kids, so they had to be able to
educate the children.
Right. They founded Harvard. Did you know that?
No. Makes sense, I guess, based on the fact that they were there at the time. But no, I didn't realize it was a puritanical school.
Cotton Mather, the famous witch hunter, was president of Harvard at one point.
That feels wrong.
Feels weird, right?
You know, I'm surprised Harvard doesn't advertise that fact.
I'm shocked.
Home of the witch trial guy. Former employer of a very problematic historical figure.
I'm clutching my pearls. So God punishes the wicked and rewards the good. If you were poor or unprosperous, then you were in dealings with the devil or living a sinful life, because God would reward his elect or his children.
Cool. What does his elect mean? It sounds very cult-like.
Yeah.
The elect. We're really killing religion today, aren't we?
We do that a lot on this podcast, and it is not intentional.
Historically speaking, some religions are just easier to poke holes in than others.
It's just that man has a faulty theology, if that makes you sleep better at night.
Feel free to believe what you believe, and we support you.
For Puritans, the true church is God's elect, which means that you had joined the church, you had been baptized. Basically, you were predestined to be one of God's, quote, saints. So he predestined and chose you from the very, very beginning. This is a tenet of Calvinism.
Like a baptism or like a declaration?
Much more detailed and nowhere near the simple "I believe" statement. You had to be in covenant with God and give a conversion narrative to the church so that they could then vote on whether your conversion was authentic.
Wow. Getting judged on your own journey. But what the heck is a conversion narrative?
It is a narrative of one's life that is given in front of the congregation, in which you list all the ways God has redeemed you, given you grace, and how you are choosing to rely solely upon him.
That sounds just like the ability to humble brag for 30 minutes.
Well,
but why couldn't they just lie, right? No, I guess that's anti-Christian.
We're talking about some major stakes here, so they can't just lie. To be sure that church leaders were not fooled into admitting hypocrites who give false testimony of their conversion, the clergy required applicants for membership to give a detailed personal narrative of their conversion experience before the whole congregation and answer questions.
Oh, there was a grilling afterward.
Yes. The clergy had a list of specific elements that they expected to hear.
Okay.
And when the candidate's narrative did not adhere to the models, they were denied membership.
So not everyone in the church is going to get this conversion narrative.
Right.
And they're not going to get to become a saint.
Right. Or go to heaven.
Or go to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. That feels very picky.
Yeah. The clergy tried to find ways to encourage good behavior, even as they knew only the few were predestined for salvation. These disgruntled and unconverted produced many problems for the colony.
I can see that. You've just told everybody that even if they have an unfun life forever, they're still not going to get a fun one next time.
Mm-hmm. And what is sticky about this particular situation is the more conservative the church, the more detailed about your sin you would have to be.
Oh.
So it was akin to public humiliation so that you could, quote, receive God's grace.
So they basically said, come embarrass yourself and we'll see if we can forgive you?
Yeah, they needed the congregation or like the popular kids to say, okay, we forgive you, rather than God's grace.
It's very high school.
It's very high school.
Ooh, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
And for that to be not just your religious structure, but your social structure as well, it's a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm. And we can see evidence of this disgruntled behavior, this unsatisfactory setup, when the halfway covenant was introduced.
What is a halfway covenant?
This meant that the public conversion narrative was out, and you could simply say you were a moral and upstanding person with the help of God. You had partial membership benefits, but you couldn't hold office and you couldn't vote in any church matters.
But did you get to go to heaven?
It was kind of like up in the air.
Oh. That doesn't sound very beneficial. What did they get if they were a halfway covenant person?
To answer that, you have to understand that the entire population was required to attend church services, whether or not you were a member of the church. Oh. And when I say member of the church, I mean one of the saints. These church members enjoyed considerable power and influence. They chose and ordained their own ministers and elected elders and deacons.
They got to decide the future of the church and how it was headed.
Right. They voted also to admit new members, so who does and doesn't become a saint.
Okay.
And to punish or dismiss those who offended against God's laws.
Uh-huh.
And although the Puritans came to America seeking the right to worship as they wished, there was no religious liberty in Puritan New England.
Oh.
Heretics, and that included anyone who was not a Puritan.
Like us.
Protestants, Catholics, Anglicans.
Okay.
They faced fines, banishment, imprisonment, or corporal punishment.
Wait, so these Puritans seeking religious freedom got all the way over here, and then they were like, anybody who's not like us, we're gonna punish?
Yes.
It's like they just didn't see that a hypocritical thought. That's odd.
All of this bled over into actual governing. The local meeting house was owned by the town and was used to conduct both town meetings and religious services. Ministers, while often called upon to advise civil magistrates, played no official, emphasis on official, role in town or colony governments.
It's a separation of church and state in name only, but not in action.
Absolutely, you are so right.
Okay.
Not only all of this, if you were not a full church member, your children could not be baptized, which meant they would have no hope of becoming, quote, elect, and therefore had no chance of salvation. So off to hell they would go.
You doomed your own family if you weren't willing to play ball.
Right.
I cannot imagine that this facilitated communal harmony.
It did not.
Ah.
And a lot of folks died because of that.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be covering it in our spooktacular.
Right. But before the witch trials in 1689, do you know what happened in the Massachusetts Bay Colony?
1689. No?
That's 3 years before the trials.
No, I don't know.
Some certain Puritans rebelled and tore up the royal charter. Therefore, they were not under the command of the king for a hot sec.
Ooh, it's like the first American Revolution.
Kind of.
The precursor.
Bear this in mind, that this is in the political background as we talk about laws surrounding the trials.
Okay.
I pulled 3 laws that were referenced in the witch trials.
Way to consolidate. Which laws?
Circa 700 BC.
Oh.
Yeah. Cited in Exodus 22:18, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Leviticus 20:27, a man also or woman that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, and their blood shall be upon them. Deuteronomy 18:10. There shall not be found among you, or anyone that maketh his son or daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer.
I'm with them on the necromancer. No, thank you.
Yeah, please don't bring anyone back. They never come back the same. It's just not worth it.
It just doesn't go well. If Halloween teaches us anything,
the dead need to stay dead.
leave them alone.
Yep.
Except for Casper. He seemed nice.
The friendly ghost. But he doesn't come back to life. He stays a ghost.
Good point.
Jumping a long way to...
A really long way. Yeah. Oh my god.
Well, I mean...
Sorry, I read ahead.
Yeah. Well, what do you need to say after that, right?
Oh my gosh. 700 BC to...
1487.
AD.
Yes.
Hop, skip, and a jump.
The Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of the Witches, or De Hexenhammer.
Ooh, Hexenhammer. I know,
right? I like that one too.
Malleus Maleficarum just sounds such a Harry Potter. Malleus
Maleficarum. This was actually a German piece written by Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, inquisitors for the Catholic Church. It was first published in Germany. Witch trials began throughout Europe following the publication of this book and lasted until the early 1700s. An estimated 40,000 to 100,000 people. 80% of all of those people were female.
What?
Were executed during that period for witchcraft.
What? In Germany?
Yeah.
Or all across Europe?
Yeah.
I did not realize that Europe as a whole was so witch-obsessed. Although, I should, based on my episode that I'm working on now. But we'll leave that a little witchy secret for later.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of people.
I know.
It's a lot of witches.
So here's a little analysis. The Malleus Maleficarum accuses witches of infanticide, cannibalism, and casting evil spells to harm their enemies, as well as having the power to steal a man's penis. It goes on to give accounts of witches committing these crimes. Arguments favoring discrimination against women are explicit in this handbook.
So that's what this is. This is a handbook.
Exactly. It's a guide.
How to identify and persecute women.
Yeah.
Witches.
Witches. Come on.
Freudian slip. Sorry.
Indeed, Freudian.
It really was.
The Malleus Maleficarum developed a powerful sex-specific theory of witchcraft based on a dualistic view of the world. Everything exists in pairs of opposites. God and Satan, Mary and Eve, men or virgins, and women. Each positive principle in a pair is delineated by its negative pole. Perfection is defined not as preservation of opposites, but rather as the extermination of negative element in a polar pair.
Extermination.
Because women are...
That's a strong word.
Yes, and because women are the negative counterpart to men, they corrupt the male perfection through witchcraft and must be destroyed.
So from the very beginning, this outlines that women equal bad. Like, even if they're not a witch, they're bad. Once they're no longer a virgin.
You can see that from biblical roots because Adam, Eve, all that deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From the beginning. That would be so exhausting to be a woman at that time.
Are you kidding? It's still exhausting to be a woman.
I'm just having your children. I'm just cooking and cleaning and keeping house for you. It's fine. Tell me I'm Satan. Well, I can take it.
I guess, until you end up on a pyre or the end of a rope.
No, thank you.
We're going to jump about 100 plus years to the Witchcraft Act of 1542, in the 33rd year of Henry VIII's reign.
Ooh, what wife would that be?
Gosh, I don't know. Howard?
I was thinking Howard too, yeah.
This piece of legislation is the first to define witchcraft as a felony in England. And this is still in the Old English, so if it sounds weird to you, it is. Quote, "The offender and offenders contrary to this act, being thereof unlawfully convict before such as shall have power and octroi to hear, determine felonies, shall have and suffer such pains of death, loss, and forfeiture of their lands, tenant goods, and cattles, as in cases of felony by the course of common laws of this realm, and also shall lose privilege of clergy and sanctuary." Now, this act was repealed by his son Edward VI, but was still very commonly referenced in the witch trials because they weren't under the king now.
So they could just do whatever they wanted.
They got to pick and choose what was relevant.
Sounds like a lot of picking and choosing, frankly.
Basically, what this says is not only will you die, but you forfeit all of your lands, all of your goods, cattle, your tenants, all of those incomes. And, of course, sanctuary is you can't go to the church and claim sanctuary.
That feels like a big one to lose.
Yes.
But I guess if it is the church that is persecuting you, it is
right.
Not going to work out.
All right. Are you ready to set the scene? Because this is just back information.
Oh, good God. Okay.
I know, I'm sorry.
Let's set that scene.
Did you know that there were 2 Salems? In Massachusetts.
Oh,
in Massachusetts.
I was like, yeah, there's one in Oregon.
And there's North Carolina.
Yep, there is. Been there.
But in the colonies.
No, I did not
in
know.
Massachusetts.
There are 2 Salem, Massachusetts.
There is Salem Town and Salem Village.
Which one does Sabrina the Teenage Witch live in?
She lives in Greendale.
She was in a Salem.
No, Salem is the cat.
Right. It's been a while.
So, there is a Salem town and a Salem village. Located on the east side, Salem town was a coastal region with a thriving harbor that brought tremendous wealth to the area. By the late 17th century, Salem town was a successful port. The prosperity of the town was incredibly appealing to the upper classes, populated by wealthy families and savvy merchants. Salem Village, on the other hand, was a poor rural community, scattered farms and houses.
Uh-oh. I can already feel trouble brewing.
While the town was experiencing exponential economic growth, the economy in the village stayed relatively stagnant. The village depended on their crops to survive. Not only did the villagers envy the townspeople's opulence, they also grew resentful of their power. The town had complete economic control over the village.
Why?
Except for the growing of crops, every other aspect was handled by the merchants, from settling the prices to determining the amount of taxes they needed to pay.
Oh.
To loosen up this chokehold, the village knew they needed to cut ties with the town. And this started by petitioning to build their own Puritan church.
Can't be independent unless you have your own religious center, which in this case was often more like government or religious control. Got it.
After several years of denials,
of course the town denied them.
The petition was finally granted in 1672 under the condition that the town church would still rule over the new congregation. This created some friction, since the village having a bit of freedom could potentially lead the merchants to losing power over Salem Village. However, the conflicts within the village continued to escalate.
Oh, gosh.
They now had to choose their own minister, but were in disagreement as to who should take on the role. They were also quarreling over different social, political, and economic issues, making life in Salem Village extremely difficult.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
The village was being driven apart by opposing forces. Apparently, not everyone in the village disliked that the town had power over them. Many wanted to keep their relationships intact and supported Salem's traditional ways. On the other hand, Reverend Samuel Parris wanted the village to be autonomous.
That seems
The
like
majority of the accusers in the Salem Witch trials were Parris supporters, while the majority of the accused had previously sided with
the all-controlling town. Right.
So this theory of economic stress being one of the main instigators of the Salem Witch trials sustains that people incriminated others in order to settle personal differences and push their personal agendas.
Oh yeah, you can really see how it would be so easy to take advantage of this situation and get rid of your enemies or at least your opponents pretty sneakily.
By accusing someone with ties to the town of witchcraft, the village could subtly remove threats to their independence.
Witchcraft. What a subtle accusation.
There is a possibility that this pattern is purely coincidental and the accusers had entirely other reasons for pointing fingers, whatever those were.
That is a very magnanimous view.
Yeah, this is only one of many explanations, as we'll see today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Economic tensions. The town versus the village.
Mm-hmm.
Who will win? Not the witches.
Not the witches. Or the innocent just innocent people.
Or the innocents.
Yeah. So here's what was coming from the pulpit every Sunday. So not only do you have polars, these poles, like we discussed earlier, this positive and negative, they're being pitted against each other, the common folk, from people who should know better, like the church, like your religious leaders who should be, saying, we just need to work for God.
But isn't the puritanical view quite fire and brimstone?
Not as much as you see in the Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening.
Okay.
But they're definitely precursors to the hellfire and brimstone, yes.
It's not as touchy-feely and as let's all be friends as
right.
some of the options today.
This is an excerpt from the New Yorker that discusses the Salem Witch trials and especially discusses what the psyche was and what was being touted propaganda-wise.
Okay.
From the pulpit came reminders of New England's many depredations. The wilderness qualified as a sort of devil's den. Since the time of Moses, the Prince of Darkness had thrived there. He was hardly pleased to be displaced by a convoy of Puritans.
Obviously.
He was, in fact, stark raving mad about it, preached Cotton Mather, a brilliant 29-year-old Boston minister. What exactly did an army of devils look like? Imagine, quote, vast regiments of cruel and bloody French dragoons, unquote.
I like how the French are Satan in this version.
Well, yeah, because they're Catholic.
Good point.
Mather instructed his North Church parishioners, and he routinely muddied the zoological waters. Indians comported themselves like roaring lions or savage bears, Quakers like grievous wolves. The French, dragons in the wilderness, completed the diabolical menagerie.
Diabolical menagerie. That's poetry.
Given the symbiotic relationship of an oppressed people and an inhospitable landscape, it was from there but a short step to a colluding axis of evil.
That's a very New Yorker statement.
Isn't it, though?
It really is.
The quotations in there of Devil's Den and bloody French dragoons.
The guy had a way with words.
Yeah.
The imagery.
The imagery.
You can absolutely see how this religious leader was able to capture his audience, how he wove his words to instill fear and instill hatred. It's clever. It's scary. And it is something that could easily happen at any time and any place. But it's very clever.
In addition to all of this...
There's more?
I know. Sure, the witch trials were terrible. And you think that's gotta scar the psyche of a people? Yes, it does. But oh my gosh, just getting there is so traumatic.
I mean, I wasn't going to say, when are we going to start killing witches? But at the same point, it is taking a while to get there. Although I am enjoying this buildup of town versus village, evil versus good, of diabolical menageries.
There are two conflicts that lived in the psyche and collective trauma of the colonists at the time.
Oh Lord, what else can we do to these poor people?
First is King Philip's War, 1675 through 76, the bloodiest conflict between American colonists and Indians in 17th century New England. Colonial settlers, no longer dependent on Indians for survival, had pushed into Indian territory in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. To protect their lands, the Wampanoag organized a federation of tribes, which in 1675 destroyed several frontier settlements. In retaliation, the colonial militia burned Indian villages and crops.
Ugh, it just never ends.
An estimated 600 settlers and 3,000 Indians were killed in the conflict.
So they're getting not fire and brimstone, but zoological metaphors from the pulpit, and watching brutal conflicts on the battlefield. But it wasn't a battlefield, it was just next door.
Yeah. Next, we have King William's War in 1689 to 1697, so after the witch trials.
So ongoing throughout the witch trials, and therefore a backdrop of more chaos added to the chaos of randomly accusing your neighbors / enemies of being witches.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
North American extension of the War of Grand Alliance waged by William III of Great Britain against France under Louis XIV.
All right. William III, a.k.a. William of William and Mary, and his arch enemy, Louis XIV. So glad that they could take their problems all the way across the Atlantic and bother other people who had nothing to do with their petty little disputes / measuring contests.
Right. Now, these two conflicts created a lot of chaos in the colonies, especially New England, where they were taking place, and this meant getting gruesome first and second-hand accounts from the wars while harboring refugees and folks who relocated because of their suffering. Can you guess what that meant?
Well, that means that they have a lot of people all of a sudden without jobs, without homes. So they had a refugee problem.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what to do.
It's financial strain. It's strain on resources. The cultural differences are probably
right,
outstanding.
Because they might not all have been puritanical.
Right.
Yes.
And a lot of Quakers came, and they hated Quakers. Why? I don't know.
How can you hate the Quakers?
Non-violent people.
They're very kumbaya.
And with all of this, we kind of then have to take a look at the crop and weather situation.
Oh my lord, I thought we were just going to talk about witches.
I know, I'm sorry.
This has gotten very complicated very quickly. We got wars, got villages versus towns.
Now,
crops.
An influx of people meant a strain on resources. Additionally, records show there was a little ice age going on. Exactly. With a spike in the 1690s, which is when the trials begin. And there's also evidence of fish, firewood, and grain shortages during this time because of...
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
They have a firewood shortage during a mini ice age? I just can't wait to hear what the ministers say about this.
I'm so glad you asked.
Okay. Me too.
How does this relate to witchcraft?
Let's talk about witchcraft. What an idea.
This is from the Malleus Maleficarum, which contains a chapter detailing the powers of witches with regard to the weather, entitled, How They Raise and Stir Up Hailstorms and Tempest and Cause Lightning to Blast Both Men and Beasts.
A, I would love to possess that talent. That sounds really cool. And B, that is not a title. That is a sentence.
It is a talent. Just wait, though. This chapter ends with a line that leaves no room for doubt about the perceived power of witches. Quote, Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that...
Reasonable? Nothing in that book should be described as reasonable.
To conclude that, just as easily as they raise hailstorms, so can they cause lightning and storms at sea, and so no doubt at all remains on these points. Unquote.
That is a confident writer about a very nebulous thing.
And now we can finally start talking about the actual witch trial.
Thank God. Or I guess maybe I should say thank Satan. But let's just do a quick little recap so we can get all of our ducks or broomsticks in a row.
Yes.
The Puritans had this town versus village rivalry.
Right.
It's really, really cold all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
And people are feeling God's judgment because of this cold.
Mm-hmm.
There have been 2 wars that have caused quite a few deaths and left a lot of refugees. So you have people who are not puritanical living in Puritan villages
And
now.
the fighting is only 50 to 70 miles away from Salem.
Oh, practically at their doorstep. We've got these witch laws that are fascinating and very incriminating to all women.
Yep.
Did we cover it?
I think so, yes.
All right, I'm ready. Let's kill some witches.
On January 15th to 19th in 1692, Betty Paris, the Reverend Paris's daughter,
Mr. Pro-Village Independence / the minister who said the reason it's cold is because all of his parishioners are sinners.
Yep, his daughter, and Abigail Williams, his niece, begin to have fits and exhibit strange behavior. Soon, Ann Putnam Jr. and other Salem Village girls begin displaying similar behavior.
Strange behavior. I've never heard of that in a teenage girl.
Never. Well, now, these odd behaviors are actually odd.
Oh, okay.
They would be in this catatonic state for extended periods of time. They would contort in odd ways. They would seize. They would speak in tongues or gibberish or have outbursts.
Double toil and trouble. Fire burn and cauldron
So,
bubble.
not just your typical moody teenager.
No, it sounds like an exorcist event.
Right. About a month later, Samuel and Elizabeth Paris, the parents, leave their children in the care of a neighbor, Mary Sibley. while they visit a nearby village to attend Thursday lecture, a religious sermon where they hope to seek answers about what is afflicting their daughter and niece. That night,
back at the Paris ranch,
Mary Sibley instructs Samuel Parris's slave, Tituba.
The Puritans had slaves?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Not very...
They're not winning on the popularity award. I used to think, like, Puritans, buckles, it's gonna be great, we're going for religious freedom, and it turns out they're just assholes. Okay.
Mary Sibley, the white upper-class woman, instructs Tituba, the enslaved woman, to make a witch cake to try and identify who is afflicting the girls.
And what, pray tell, is a witch cake?
A witch cake is the afflicted girl's urine and flour, and then you make that into a dough, bake it up, and they, in this case, fed it to the household dog.
Why did they do that to the poor dog?
Tituba was forced into this situation where she was accused of witchcraft after this witch cake incident.
I can't imagine why.
Mixture of rye and Betty's urine, cooked and fed to a dog.
Yeah, a poor innocent dog who probably didn't want to eat flour and urine. What is that supposed to prove?
Would reveal the identity of Betty's afflictor.
Like the dog was just gonna start spouting off names after eating it? Makes about as much sense as witches controlling the weather.
When the good Reverend Parris came back, he was enraged when he found out about the cake, and shortly thereafter, the afflicted girls named Tituba as a witch, and Parris beat her until she confessed.
That feels very pastorally of him.
It feels like this is definitely a genuine confession.
Absolutely.
Around that same time, two other girls in Salem Village, Ann Putnam Jr. and Elizabeth Hubbard, also begin to show signs of affliction.
By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes.
2 days later, while walking through Salem on an errand, Elizabeth Hubbard claims to be stalked by a large wolf that she believes was either a witch in disguise or was sent by a witch.
Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air.
By the end of the month, Dr. William Griggs reportedly examines the girls but is unable to determine the cause of the strange behavior and suggests they are under the influence of Satan.
So all the girls are acting weird now.
Yeah. Not all, but a lot, yeah.
But it began with these two Paris girls, and
yes,
they're still acting weird, and now more and more are becoming, quote-unquote, afflicted.
Yeah, Griggs, instead of saying, you know what, this is not my deal, I don't know, he instead is like, the devil, bewitched, that's it. And so I did a little digging on what would be in your medical bag from 1692. And
oh, sure,
it looked a little different.
Ooh, what's in there?
Beetle's blood, fox lung, and dried dolphin heart. Where they got that, I don't know.
Wait, that was what he had in his medical bag?
That would be typical for 1692.
That sounds like a witch's brew.
Doesn't it? And it gets worse. Salem Village had one practicing physician that winter, Dr. Griggs. He owned 9 medical texts. That's it. He could likely read, but not write. His surgical arsenal consisted of lances, razors, and saws.
So, he was an idiot. An idiot with a saw.
And dolphin heart, just casually.
Eye of newt and toe of frog, wool of bat and tongue of dog.
On February 29th, 1962, the first accusations were made. They accused Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne of witchcraft, and arrest warrants are issued for these women. And it is important to note that all 3 of these women were outliers in the community. Sarah Good started out privileged, wealthy, amazing. Her life was great. She was on track to be one of the elect. And then her dad commits suicide. She gets husband after husband. They all die mysteriously. It's one thing after another. She has a lot of debts from either herself or her husband, and she's described in her trials as, quote, cruel and shameful to the highest degree.
Okay.
There was no one in the country around against whom popular suspicion could have been more readily directed or in whose favor and defense less interest could be awakened.
They really did find the best scapegoat.
Yeah. They did not like
the one
her.
They all hated.
Sarah Osborne, not quite as wretched, but still not one of the elect.
Was she like the one girl that was willing to hang out with Sarah Good?
She might have been nice to her
Tainted
once.
by association.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, March starts a whole new wave of crap. Judge John Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwin examined Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne at the Salem Village Meeting House. Now remember, our meeting house is civil and religious. Everything happens here.
Right.
During the examination, Tituba confesses to being a witch and tells the court there are many witches in Salem.
Was she being physically abused for this confession?
She was not. The colony had created the court of Oyer and Turner to see and to determine.
Okay.
And that's how they judged things. This was made especially for these witchcraft trials. The law did not use the principle of innocent until proven guilty.
Ugh.
If you made it to trial, the law presumed there was enough evidence to convict. If the colony imprisoned you, you had to pay for your stay. Courts relied on 3 types of evidence in this case: confession, testimony of 2 eyewitnesses to acts of witchcraft, or 3, spectral evidence. When the afflicted girls were having their fits, they would interact with an unseen assailant, the apparition of the witch or the spirit of the witch tormenting them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no court ever convicted an accused witch, allegedly, on the basis of spectral evidence alone. Other forms of evidence were needed to corroborate the charge of witchcraft. Courts allowed casual relationship evidence. That's kind of what you were talking about, being tainted by association.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For example, to prove that the accused possessed or controlled an afflicted girl, prior conflicts of bad acts, likely by the accused, possession of materials used in spells like a poppet or, I don't know, a cauldron. If the accused was female, a jury of women examined her body for a witch's mark, which supposedly showed that a familiar had bitten or fed on the accused. Probably just like a melanoma that no one knows why it's there.
It's a mole.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.
Other evidence included the touching test. Afflicted girls tortured by fits became calm after touching the accused.
That feels pretty easy to fake.
Courts could not base convictions on confessions obtained through torture unless the accused reaffirmed the confession afterward. But if the accused recanted the confession, authorities usually tortured the accused further to obtain the confession again. Another one, if you recited the Lord's Prayer, you were not a witch.
Wait a minute. All you had to do was say the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah, but it had to be perfect. No flubs. In one case, instead of hallowed, E-D, be thy name, he said hallow, no E-D. And that was taken as he couldn't say it. And so he was killed.
These people went to church all the time.
Mm-hmm.
This would be like asking them to recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah.
And yet they couldn't
couldn't do it.
That seriously feels like a get-out-of-jail-free card. Or maybe I should say get off the pyre card. You know, avoid that burning.
This colony did not burn witches.
But
it hanged them.
That's not disappointing because, you know, I feel for the women that were wrongly accused and then murdered. And it does feel that burning would hurt more than hanging. But do they not know anything about witches? I mean, everybody knows you have to burn them.
Or drown them. There are plenty of ways to get it done.
But hanging is not the right way.
Well, that's what you think. But you're thinking Europe, not colonial America.
But Europe came first. They had this witch stuff figured out.
Did they, though?
I mean, James VI thought so.
Oh, God. We'll get to him in a few weeks. All of this to say, they were not physically beating Tituba while she did this confession in court. But the jails were basically pits, and she had been there for at least 4 weeks. And you had to pay for everything because the jails were not equipped for stays more than a few days. If you ate, you paid for it, your family brought it, or if you wanted a blanket or fresh hay to sleep on, you had to buy it.
As a slave, would she have anybody who could do that for her?
No, unless her owner...
So she was starving.
Yeah. Had no luxuries, no medical care, no blanket, in an ice age.
No, that's not a luxury. That's a basic necessity. So she was freezing to death and starving to death.
Huh?
Honestly, death might have seemed like a release.
And this was not exclusive just to her. This was to
No, to everyone. But
and
she had a much lower likelihood of anyone coming to her rescue or aid. Ugh.
They equated it in one article to $38 a day. Now, what the inflation rate would be, I don't know. But can't imagine that it's cheap.
Even by today's value, $38 for bread, water, and a pit isn't exactly a bargain.
So,
what's next?
A week later, Increase Mather and his son, Samuel, leave London, England.
Hold on. This man's name is Increase?
Yes. Cotton Mather's son. With a name like Cotton, you think he was going to give him a normal name?
But Increase?
May my blessings increase.
It's a verb.
Well, let me tell you, Increase Mather was verbing it up. He was doing stuff.
All right, Increase, bring it on.
He, with his son Samuel, leave London, England with the Massachusetts governor, William Phips. So he's not here to really oversee what's going on in Massachusetts.
Okay, so we have a slight power vacuum.
Slight, yes. In March, there are a lot of accusations and arrests made. Martha Corey, Rebecca Nurse, 4-year-old Dorcas Good, daughter of Sarah Good, is accused of witchcraft and is arrested at 4 years old.
What?
Mm-hmm.
What had this 4-year-old done to get on people's bad sides? Was she like a little tantrumy?
I don't know. She was just contaminated by the mother, I suppose.
Wow.
Rebecca Nurse is arrested. Now,
And
Rebecca Nurse was a very prominent figure in the community. She was a midwife and had birthed a lot of babies in that village and in the town.
It's always the midwife.
It's always the midwife.
Always.
But she was also, by this point, in her 60s, if not her 70s. So she's old.
Oh.
She's arrested and examined. Rebecca's sister, Sarah Cloyce, is accused of witchcraft after defending her sister, as only a sister should, right?
Yeah, thank goodness somebody had some sort of loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't think it's going to work out for her.
I don't think it's going to work out for anybody. Elizabeth Proctor is accused of witchcraft. Bridget Bishop, Abigail Hobbs, Mary Warren, and Giles Corey are accused of witchcraft. Then...
So is anything happening to these people after they're examined?
So they're examined and then they go sit in jail for months.
So they are sitting in this cold jail and their families are paying for them to be there, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Think about when we were in Rhode Island. In March and April, it's still freezing.
Yeah.
I'm still wearing a coat, and it wasn't an ice age.
That's a good point. It was not an ice age.
Edward and Sarah Bishop, Mary Easty, Nehemiah Abbott, William and Deliverance Hobbs, Mary Black, Mary English, and Sarah Wilds are arrested on charges of witchcraft and examined by Judge Hawthorne and Corwin.
Who are these judges?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked.
Oh, good. I'm so...
Aren't you glad you asked?
I don't know. We'll find out.
We'll just do Hawthorne. Because Corwin,
Okay.
John Hawthorne is a Salemite down and through. Salem town, that is. He was a noted merchant and politician. His political skills won him a position as a justice of the peace and then a county judge.
Okay.
He was a replacement for the Salem minister George Burroughs, so he was also a very religious man and a lay minister. Funnily enough, he sentenced Burroughs, the man he replaced, to death in the witch trials.
Oops.
Whoops. Hawthorne believed the devil could use witches to undermine the purpose of the church and do harm to people. Because of this belief, he took very seriously the complaints about suspected witches and thought that they could, in fact, infiltrate the church, which was pretty controversial at the time.
So Hawthorne is really leading this?
Yes.
Okay.
In my opinion.
In your opinion. Because he's decided that you can be a member of the church but still be a witch.
Mm-hmm.
And he just finds this like a fun thing to do with his free time.
I don't know if he thinks it's a fun thing to do, but...
It probably is convenient. I mean, he's a townie after all. Down with the village. One witch at a time.
Well, where is all this property and money and cattle going?
To Judge Hawthorne?
Not to Hawthorne personally, but back to Salem Town.
Salem Town. Mm-hmm.
Dorcas Hoare, Lydia Dustin, Sarah Morey, and Susanna Martin arrested on charges of witchcraft and examined. George Burroughs is accused of witchcraft and is arrested in Wells, Maine. George Burroughs, like we said, was previously a minister in Salem.
Right.
He also was a war hero and noted for his feats of strength. He was known to be able to pick up these huge full molasses barrels, but people didn't see that as
super helpful.
Strong. They were like, it has to be the devil giving him supernatural powers because he's a short king.
He's a short king?
Opposite of
Napoleon
syndrome.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I've known some. I get that.
George Burroughs is examined. Sarah Churchill, one of the afflicted girls, is also examined. George Jacobs Sr. and his granddaughter Margaret Jacobs are arrested. Sarah Osborne, one of the very first witches accused, dies in prison. Increase Mather returns from England with the new charter and the new governor, William Phips. He is back. Mary Eastie is released from prison but is arrested a second time after her accusers protest her release.
I mean, if I'd accused her, I'd protest that too.
Yeah, because someone's coming after me, whether it be her or the devil. Roger Toothaker is accused of witchcraft and is arrested. And finally, on May 25th, Governor Phips sets up a special court of Oyer and Terminer to hear the witchcraft cases. So up until this point, they're really just collecting them into the prison.
Pits.
Yes.
So it started in January.
Yes.
And now we are in May, and they've decided they have to do something about all these women living in prison pits.
Yeah, because Governor Phips comes back and is like officially the governor again.
Mm-hmm. And he's like, what's going on?
Yeah, it's awkward. He has a job. He sets up the special court of Oyer and Terminer to hear these cases.
And did he decide how things would be judged?
It was a council of judges, and the council of judges made the decision.
Got it.
7 judges are appointed to the court.
And then we finally get some common sense and stop all these accusations?
We get more arrests.
Holy cow.
John Alden Jr., Martha Carrier, Elizabeth Howe, Wilmot Red, and Philip English.
Any more?
No. On June 2nd, Bridget Bishop is pronounced guilty of witchcraft and condemned to death.
So she's our first condemnation.
Yes. And after Bridget's trial, Nathaniel Saltonstall resigns from the court and is replaced by Corwin.
Did he have issues with what was happening?
He did.
Interesting. Just one of the 7 had issues.
And he tried, I will say, not very hard, but he hoped that his resignation would...
make an impact.
Right. It didn't.
It did not.
That's how we start off June, and it just gets worse from there.
Let's go.
Bridget Bishop is hanged at Proctor's Ledge in Salem, the first official execution.
And are they hanging because there was a firewood shortage? Is that why they're hanging instead of burning? Did they not understand how to rid the world of witchcraft's evil?
I really thought they had read all of the books. Apparently not.
It sounds like they've done research into the witchcraft world.
Roger Toothaker dies in prison, another one of our accused witches. Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds are tried for witchcraft, found guilty, and condemned to die on July 19th.
Oh my.
Martha Emerson, daughter of Roger Toothaker, who just died in prison, is accused of witchcraft.
Oh my gosh.
Then on July 23rd, John Proctor, husband of Elizabeth Proctor, writes a letter to the Boston clergy describing the torture used against the accused and asks for the trials to be moved to Boston.
That makes sense. Maybe we should just get out of this funk.
The bubble.
Out of this spiraling craziness and find some clarity.
John Proctor, throughout this whole witch trial and witch hunt, is one of the few who really approaches things with a little more rational mind. He is cooler and more calculated than a lot of other people. So instead of falling into the hysteria or saying, oh, I've got to ride this out or play the game, he tries to go around and go above.
Applaud him for that. Not sure it made that much effort.
It really bites him in the ass.
No, does it now? Shocking.
Also shocking, he is one of my collateral ancestors on my mother's side.
Oh, I like the term collateral and I guess I'll claim them, but he's damaged goods.
One of his brothers is my direct ancestor.
Cool.
Martha Emerson, daughter of Mary and Roger Toothaker, is arrested and examined, and then Mary Toothaker is arrested. So both of their kids have been arrested and examined. George Burroughs, George Jacobs Sr., Martha Carrier, John Proctor, Elizabeth Proctor, and John Willard are tried for witchcraft, found guilty, and condemned.
Yep, John Proctor did not get away with that. Okay.
And that's how we start off August.
Some good high-profile condemnations.
I will say, a little bright light. On August 9th, Robert Pike, the Massachusetts Bay Councilor and Salisbury magistrate, writes a personal letter to George Corwin expressing his concern with the admission of spectral evidence in the trial. So that's where the accused allegedly see the spirit of the witch afflicting them.
I'm glad that we're thinking that's not perhaps the most legitimate evidence.
On August 19th, 1692, John Proctor, George Jacobs Sr., George Burroughs, Martha Carrier, and John Willard are hanged at Proctor's Ledge.
Are any of them confessing to this at this point, or are people going to their grave saying, this is crap?
That's the thing. The people who are being executed are those who are denying the claims.
So if you say, yes, I'm a witch, I was possessed by the devil, you can then be fixed and brought back. So it's only those who were like, this is stupid, that are getting hanged.
The Proctors were not the elect, but they rivaled the elect in wealth and land.
So this was a very convenient killing.
Yes. On August 20th, Margaret Jacobs recants her testimony against her grandfather, George Jacobs, and George Burroughs.
On their own families?
People were turning on each other. And the idea that you can inherit bewitchment or witchcraft tendencies, it's a hereditary idea, much like sin passed on.
We've seen that before. I'm thinking Elizabeth Woodville. Like, her mother supposedly had some witchcraftiness, so the daughter inherited it, and then the court's like, she's bewitched him. Okay.
And that is also why a lot of people are keeping these familial ties and saying it's family, because then if they all confess, they can be fixed and be saved. Or that's one historian's take on it.
One historian's take on it. It sounds quite selfish to me.
Yeah.
No, Grandpappy really was trying to bewitch me. What? Who turns over their grandfather?
It just seems like
just weird.
Omitting that would be just fine.
So when one recants witchcraft, does one just say, oops, it was a mistake? Does one admit to being bitchy and trying to hurt others?
I think it was more of, it was a mistake. It certainly wouldn't have been, I did it on purpose. Yeah, maliciously.
That would look bad, yeah.
Then we have more arrestings and accusations.
Ooh.
Samuel Wardwell, Sarah Wardwell, Mercy Wardwell, and Sarah Hawkes Jr., Margaret Prince, Elizabeth Dicer of Gloucester. And then...
I guess I just don't understand why they were faking this.
You're assuming they're faking it right now, and there are some semi-logical explanations that we'll get into later, yeah.
Okay, alright.
We're in September, and we're still rolling in with Mary Easty, Martha Corey, and Ann Pudiator. Alice Parker, Mary Bradbury, and Dorcas Hoare are all tried and condemned. Martha Corey is excommunicated from the church.
So she was one of the elect.
Yeah.
And still this happened.
She was very wealthy and upstanding, one of the elect, and her husband was not. He had a very rough reputation. Had several wives, had gotten into a lot of brawls, had been in front of the court several times. And their marriage in general was hot. It was hot goss, and people didn't like it.
Why did she marry him?
I guess love? Because it certainly wasn't his money.
Okay.
They do actually visit her in prison and inform her that she's been excommunicated, which I guess is like some small kindness. No.
It's salt in a wound. Rub, rub, rub. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Who's next?
More people are condemned. Wilmot Red, Mary Parker, Margaret Scott, Samuel Wardwell again, Rebecca Earns, Abigail Faulkner, Mary Lacey, Abigail Hobbs again, and Anne Foster are tried and condemned.
Okay.
And now Giles, who is Martha's husband.
Yeah.
Remember the one
the
we
brawling
were talking about?
husband.
Yeah. So on September 19th, he's 71 years old at this point. He is pressed to death after refusing to continue with his trial. Are you familiar with that form of execution?
It's where you just put stone upon stone upon stone, right?
Yes.
And the person literally just is unable to breathe any longer. And their bones crack.
Yep. He's 81 and they're doing this to him. And do you know what he says? The only thing he says, because he, at his trial, refuses to speak because he thinks it's
so stupid.
Silly.
No, what does he say?
More weight.
Dude was ballsy. That fits with his personality, but I guess he knew it was coming and he's like, let's make it quick.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Dorcas Hoare confesses and her execution is delayed.
So again, this notion of confession equals salvation.
Right. On September 22nd, we have another batch of hangings, and that is Martha Corey, Alice Parker, Margaret Scott, Anne Pudiator, Mary Easty, Samuel Wardwell, Wilmot Red, and Mary Parker are all hanged at Proctor's Ledge. Thankfully, these are the last hangings and executions to take place during the Salem Witch trials.
Okay, and they're the last because something is going to happen.
Yep. We're starting to make headlines, for lack of a better term, and
because they're murdering all of the elderly in the community.
We get merchants from Boston writing letters to criticize the witch trials and its use of spectral evidence. These letters to unnamed clergymen are widely circulated in the colony, so it's starting to get testy.
Yeah. Because it's weird.
And that's how we kick off October.
It feels appropriate that it's October when everything comes together.
On October 12th, Governor Phipps puts an end to any new witchcraft cases in Salem and bans any new publications about the trials. So basically a gag order.
No freedom of the press, yeah.
And just 2 weeks later, Governor Phipps dissolves the court of Oyer and Terminer.
Okay.
Now, just because the court is adjourned does not mean that the accusations stop.
Accusations are still reigning in.
And so are the arrests.
Oh, God.
There are so many people still waiting on a trial sitting in prison. And between October and November, we get 5 more accusations that just go to sit. On November 25th, the General Court finally creates a Superior Court to try the remaining cases.
So we're still trying them.
Just not in Oyer and Terminer mode.
Okay.
It is a Superior Court. Now, what that entails,
this is a more legitimate court and not just one based on the spectral?
Yes, so spectral evidence, to my knowledge, is out in the Superior Court.
That's good.
On December 14th of 1692, the Great and General Court of Massachusetts passes a new law allowing the widow of a condemned witch to keep her dowry and inheritance, which normally would be confiscated by the court. The law also allows for a condemned witch to be given a proper Christian burial and provides alternative punishments to death of lesser witchcraft-related crimes. So if you are maybe mixing up some herbs, fine, okay, slap on the wrist, but it's personal injury that's now only a death sentence.
Well, and they're taking away some of the incentive to condemn people because no longer is their inheritance and money all going to go to the court.
Mm-hmm.
And then it looks like they took a little break for Christmas.
A little break for Christmas, and we come back in January where the Deputy Governor Stoughton prohibits the use of spectral evidence and makes the testimony of our original accusers and afflicted girls inadmissible in a court of law. Which, thank God.
Thank God, because that is the weirdest part of all of this.
And so now we come to January and February where the 52 of the remaining accused are tried, and Stoughton finds 3 of them guilty and adds them to the list of the other 5 witches still awaiting execution, one of which...
So even though they've decided some of this is crazy and the evidence shouldn't be good, they're going to keep the original 5 that are waiting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, and Governor Phipps grants a stay of execution for the prisoners upon the advice from the Attorney General to the King and Queen, which really pisses Stoughton off, because Phipps...
I can see why Stoughton would be pissed off. This was his thing.
On February 16th, we get several dissenters in Salem Village congregation. They file a complaint against Reverend Samuel Parrish, stating they refuse to attend church while he is still minister due to his role in the trials. Parrish spends the next few years embroiled in legal battles with the parishioners.
I mean, somebody finally told this man to sit down and shut up.
Go away.
Go away.
And then, not even 5 days later, Governor Phipps writes to the Earl of Nottingham's Secretary of State for King William and Queen Mary, explaining why he put a stop to any new witchcraft cases in Salem, disbanded the court of Oyer and Terminer, and set up a new court to hear the remaining cases.
He's trying to cover his ass because this is not going well.
And then everyone's just still in limbo until April, when Queen Mary issues a royal letter drafted by the Earl of Nottingham to Governor Phipps, ordering that he stop all witchcraft trials.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Queen had to get involved.
Yeah. Yes.
On a different continent, the Queen had to be like, stop this.
Then they're in limbo until May, when Governor Phipps receives instructions from England stopping all further court proceedings against accused witches and pardons the remaining accused in jail. At this point, people have been there a year and 4 months.
So they get to leave.
Mm-hmm.
What about if they had already been condemned?
Yeah. All of it. Done.
All of it. Just, This is ridiculous.
Yep. And
you guys had a year and a half of crazy.
In July, Governor Phipps has a meeting of the General Council at his house to read the letter from the Queen.
Guys, we seriously have to stop this. The Queen says so.
And then a year later, Governor Phipps is recalled to England to answer charges against him of misappropriation of government funds and dies the next year.
Oh. I think these girls were just making this all up just to get attention. But you've said there are possibly other reasons.
I just don't know that they have that much imagination to make all of this up.
Well, not at first. At first it was kind of fun. And then they were like, oh crap, we're stuck in this. And then they were like, we gotta double down. And then all these old men started pulling out these famous texts about witches. And they were like, oh yeah, that too. That works. Yeah, that happened too.
I think, this is my personal thought, I think it's a combination.
I can see that.
I do think maybe 1 or 2 people actually had some sort of poisoning or...
Maybe they were epileptic.
Any number of things. Yes.
Yeah.
Or even something, maybe they were diabetic and were in a bit of a state of shock and then came out of it. I think there was at least some medical disturbance. And then I do think it snowballed from there. One of the most interesting and the most compelling theories is ergot poisoning. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not. What is ergot?
In 1976, Linda Caparel offered the first evidence that Salem witch trials followed an outbreak of rye ergot. Ergot is a fungus blight that forms hallucinogenic drugs in bread.
Oh.
Its victims can appear bewitched when they're actually just stoned. Ergot thrives in a cold winter followed by a wet spring. The victims of ergot might suffer paranoia, hallucinations, twitches, spasms, cardiovascular trouble. and stillborn children. Ergot also seriously weakens the immune system.
Okay.
Once contracted from rye bread, if you remember, that's what the witch cake was made out of, because rye was very, very popular in New England. So once contracted from rye bread, ergotism, also called St. Anthony's fire, causes severe convulsions, muscle spasms, delusions, the sensation of crawling under the skin, and in extreme cases, gangrene of the extremities.
Oh my.
Severe hallucinations can also be a symptom, as lysergic acid is the substance from which the drug LSD is synthesized.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So these symptoms were the same as those shown by the accused in Salem, mostly young girls whose immune systems had not fully developed.
That makes a lot of sense.
Leaving them susceptible to diseases such as ergotism.
Wow.
And the village doctor, Dr. Griggs, being religious, and so the theory goes, unaware of ergotism as a disease, because who would know, attributed the strange symptoms to a known evil, witchcraft. He claimed that the girls had fallen victim to the evils of witchcraft, and the girls went along with it. The rest of the townsfolk fell victim to suggestibility, and thus the trials commenced, with the accusations of witchcraft being targeted at the outcasts of society by those who were afflicted. And according to this theory, the abrupt end to the witch trials in May 1693 happened, quite simply, because Salem ran out of ergot-contaminated grain.
I think it's because Queen Mary wasn't afflicted by ergot, but okay. That's crazy.
Yeah. And that kind of leads us into aftermath and confessions. I think it's also interesting that magically, Governor Phipps became disinterested in the witch trials when his own wife was being questioned for witchcraft. That's when he prohibited further arrest, released many of the accused witches, and dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer.
What?
That's when he replaced it with the Superior Court of Judicature, which disallowed the spectral evidence and only condemned 3 of 56 defendants. And he did eventually pardon all who were in prison on witchcraft charges. But the damage had been done. 19 were hanged on Gallows Hill, and Giles was pressed to death with heavy stones. Several people died in jail, and nearly 200 people overall had been accused of practicing the devil's magic.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
And all because of some fungus bread.
Maybe.
Wow. Maybe. Perhaps.
Listen,
Perhaps.
Do I think that maybe a few of them are like, that's how it started out? Yes.
Yeah, I can see it just spiraled.
But what do you do now? Because then I do think people used it as, okay, I'm gonna settle my score here.
I think that's absolutely, yeah.
So, there were some confessions that are worth mentioning.
Okay.
Tituba was the first to confess in Salem, and she likely did it to avoid further punishment. In her confession, she apologized for hurting Betty, and this is after all of this. Claimed she never wanted to hurt Betty and professed her love for the child. She wove such a lively tale of an active community of witches in Salem, and that's when she named Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne as witches. And by confessing early on, Tituba avoided the ordeal of going to trial and joining with the afflicted girls in providing key evidence against the accused witches. Her husband, John, would also fall into fits and become afflicted. When public sentiment towards the accusers and the trials began to change, Tituba recanted her confession.
Oh my lord.
This further enraged Paris because she was a star witness. She would sit there and regale them for hours with her testimony of how she had met the Dark Lord.
So she was just a really good storyteller.
Well, she was trying to give them what they wanted. They wanted a confession. I'll give you a freaking confession. Just don't beat me anymore.
Yep.
A lot of historians had said she had brought in her culture from the Caribbean and potentially the first seeds of voodoo in the New World in this trial, trying to confess and give them whatever they wanted to hear.
Oh, wow.
Of course, her recanting all of this enraged Paris, who, in retaliation, refused to pay the jailer's fee, of course, to get Tituba out of prison. As a result, she spent 13 months in jail until an unknown person paid the £7 for her release and bought her.
Oh.
It is likely that the same person bought her husband John because Puritans were not inclined to split up married couples, even enslaved persons.
Kind of them.
It's unknown what happened to her after she began her life with her new owner.
Okay.
She just, drops off the map.
And probably was thrilled to do so.
Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, made a public apology for his involvement in the Salem trials. A number of jurors who had been instrumental in the condemnations of witches also jumped to make their own public apology.
Okay.
We confess that we ourselves were not capable to understand nor able to withstand the mysterious delusion of the powers of darkness and the prince of the air, but were for want of knowledge in ourselves and better information from others prevailed to take up with such evidence against the accused as on further consideration and better information we justly fear was insufficient for the touching of lives of any. Deuteronomy 17:6, whereby we fear we have been instrumental with others, though ignorantly and unwillingly, to bring upon ourselves and this people of the Lord the guilt of innocent blood, which sin the Lord saith in Scripture he would not pardon. This is all in their apology.
Yeah, in their apology they're quoting the Bible.
Yeah, we suppose in regard of his temporal judgments, we do therefore hereby signify to all in general and the surviving sufferers in especial our deep sense of sorrow, and for our errors in acting on such evidence to the condemning of any person, and do hereby declare that we justly fear that we were sadly deluded and mistaken, for we are much disquieted and distressed in our minds, and do therefore humbly beg forgiveness, first of God, for Christ's sake, for this our error, and pray that God would not impute the guilt of it to ourselves nor to others. Yeah. And we also pray that we may be considered candidly and aright by the living sufferers as being then under the power of a strong and general delusion, utterly unacquainted with and not experienced in matters of that nature. We do heartily ask forgiveness of all of you, whom we have justly offended, and do declare, according to our present minds, we would none of us do such things again or on such grounds for the whole world, praying you to accept of this in way of satisfaction of our offense, and that you would bless the inheritance of the Lord, that he may be entreated for the land.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It was signed by not all, but some.
So they were just like, yeah, we were totally wrong, sorry.
And only one of the afflicted girls apologized, ever.
Really?
That was in 1706. And
that is a long time later.
Yep, Anne Putnam was the only one of the afflicted girls to make an apology for her participation in the Salem Witch trials. She stood in church while her apology was read, quote, I desire to be humbled before God. It was a great delusion of Satan that deceived me in that sad time. I did not do it out of anger, malice, or ill will, unquote.
I think there was some ill intent. I don't care what the apologies say. I think that they knew it was bullshit, and they were like, this is working. Let's keep going. And then they got caught, and they were like, just kidding.
Oh, yeah. Now,
Whoopsies.
Don't get me wrong. I think the afflicted girls were definitely taken advantage of. And I think that their poisoning, if you believe the fungus situation, I think the parents saw an opening.
An opportunity.
But I think that the people who were manipulating the situation were the power players.
Right.
Those who had. And the have-nots, who were the more general public, I do think they were hit by a genuine hysteria. You've got war going on. You don't have enough food on your table. It is freezing.
And there's no firewood.
It does seem like God is punishing you.
It does feel that way. I can see that. But no.
But yeah, don't hang people for it.
Stop it. Be nice.
And that is the episode. What an episode it is. But I do want to end on a little bit of a positive note. Now, it doesn't
We're not going to bring them back from the dead. No necromancy.
In 2022, officially, the last witch was exonerated from the Salem Witch trials.
I read about this. It was by students.
An 8th grade civics class, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., is officially a witch no more. Her name was cleared 329 years after she was convicted at the Salem Witch trials.
Oh, cool. Ironically, the Salem Witch trials were a very short blip but a very long episode. Tune in next week. We have something super duper exciting. We are doing a collaborative episode with Book Talk for Book Talk, and we're going to be talking about vampirism
and how gender politics is involved in literature. I cannot wait for you guys to meet Jack and Amy. Please go check out Book Talk for Book Talk on all major streaming apps. They are currently #1 in arts podcasts, so we're super excited to have them on.
Yes, we are, because we just have been discussing now 2 weeks in a row, specifically women that have been put into a place of evil based almost solely on gender.
Oh, yeah. Down with the patriarchy.
Please make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And make sure that you click the little plus button so that you're getting all of our latest episodes. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. And we are Pithily Yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!